The winter sun hung low over Atlanta, casting long golden shadows across Centennial Olympic Park as the city's famous Christmas market stirred to life. Steam rose from coffee carts and mulled wine stations, curling into the crisp December air like lazy spirits. The temperature hovered just above freezing, cold enough to justify the heavy coats and knitted scarves wrapped around the necks of early morning vendors setting up their booths, but not cold enough for snow. Atlanta rarely saw snow, even in the depths of winter. But the market organizers had compensated with artificial white powder, dusting the rooftops of wooden chalets and a massive snow machine that periodically released flurries over the central plaza. Lieutenant Sarah Collins adjusted her duty belt and surveyed the scene from the eastern entrance, her breath forming small clouds that dissipated quickly in the morning light. Beside her, K-9 Max sat at perfect attention, his triangular ears rotating like satellite dishes, picking up sounds that human ears could never detect. The Belgian Malinois had been unusually alert since they arrived, his dark eyes scanning the growing crowd with an intensity that seemed excessive for what was supposed to be a routine patrol assignment. Sarah reached down and scratched behind his ear. Max leaned into her touch briefly, then returned to his surveillance. 7 years of partnership had taught her to read his moods with the same precision she read crime scene evidence. Something had his attention, though she could not yet identify what. The Christmas market sprawled across nearly 4 acres of prime downtown real estate, transforming the area around the park into a Germanic winter wonderland. Over 200 vendors occupied the wooden stalls arranged in neat rows, selling everything from handcrafted ornaments to artisanal cheeses, from custom jewelry to imported German nutcrackers standing 3 feet tall. The market had been running for 6 days now, drawing tens of thousands of visitors each day, and would continue until Christmas Eve. Security had been relatively uneventful thus far. A few pickpockets had been apprehended, a couple of drunk and disorderly incidents, one minor altercation between competing food vendors over territorial boundaries. Nothing that required the specialized skills of the K-9 unit. Captain Morrison had assigned Sarah and Max to the market detail as a reward of sorts, a break from the grueling pace of their recent narcotics operations. 3 months of undercover work had culminated in a major bust that netted 17 arrests and seized over $4 million worth of fentanyl. The department brass wanted her visible at a high-profile public event. Good optics for the Community Relations Division, and Sarah had not objected. A few days of walking through a Christmas market, drinking hot chocolate, and watching families enjoy the holiday atmosphere seemed like exactly what she needed. But Max had other ideas about relaxation. The dog rose to his feet without command, his nose working the air in quick, sharp inhalations. Sarah felt the leash tension change in her hand, the familiar pull that indicated Max had detected something worth investigating. She had learned long ago not to question his instincts. The dog's nose could detect scents at concentrations of parts per trillion, a sensitivity so acute it bordered on supernatural. If Max thought something warranted attention, something warranted attention. They moved through the market together, weaving between early shoppers who smiled at the handsome police dog and his handler. A group of elderly women from a church group cooed at Max as they passed, and he ignored them completely, his focus locked on something ahead. Sarah offered them a polite nod, but did not stop. The leash remained taut, Max pulling with controlled determination toward the western section of the market where the artisan craft vendors had clustered. The wooden chalets in this area displayed an array of handmade goods that sparkled and glittered in the morning sunlight. Glass ornaments hung in precise rows, catching the light and throwing rainbows across the artificial snow. Ceramic figurines depicting nativity scenes and winter villages occupied shelf after shelf. And in the center of this section, occupying a double-wide booth with an elaborate display, stood a vendor selling snow globes. Max stopped directly in front of this booth and sat down, his signal that he had found what he was looking for. Sarah studied the display with fresh eyes, trying to see what Max was telling her. The booth was professionally arranged, dozens of snow globes of various sizes occupying tiered shelves that allowed each piece to be seen clearly. The globes contained miniature scenes of Atlanta landmarks, the Georgia Aquarium, the World of Coca-Cola, the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park, all rendered in painstaking detail and suspended in liquid that sparkled with glitter when shaken. A banner across the top of the booth proclaimed Atlanta Memories in elegant script, and a smaller sign indicated the vendor had been featured in Southern Living magazine. Behind the counter stood a man in his mid-40s, average height, sandy brown hair going grey at the temples, wearing a red sweater with a Christmas tree pattern that seemed deliberately chosen to appear festive and harmless. He smiled broadly at Sarah and Max as they approached, though she noticed his eyes flick to the dog with something that might have been concern. "Good morning, officer," the man said, his southern accent thick and warm. "Beautiful dog you have there." "He a shepherd, Belgian Malinois," Sarah replied. She did not return the smile. Her attention was focused on Max, who had not moved from his seated position. The dog's eyes were fixed on a cardboard box visible beneath the display counter, partially hidden by a red tablecloth. "Max and I are doing a routine sweep of the market. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" The vendor's smile remained fixed, but Sarah had been a cop long enough to recognize the micro-expression that crossed his face. Fear quickly suppressed. "Happy to help," he said. "Name's Gerald Whitmore. This is my 6th year at this market. Never had any trouble." Sarah nodded, her hand resting casually on Max's head. The dog remained absolutely still, his attention never wavering from the box beneath the counter. "These are beautiful pieces," she said, gesturing at the snow globes. "You make them yourself?" "Every single one," Gerald replied, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Got a workshop up in Dahlonega. Takes about 3 weeks to complete each globe, from design to final sealing. The liquid is a special mixture, proprietary formula. Keeps the glitter suspended longer than any commercial product on the market." Sarah picked up one of the display globes, a scene depicting the Atlanta skyline at night. She shook it gently and watched the glitter swirl around the tiny buildings. It was genuinely beautiful, the kind of craftsmanship that justified the $75 price tag. But Max had not led her here to admire artistry. "What is in that box under the counter?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Gerald's smile flickered. "Just inventory. More globes for when these sell out. Mind if I take a look?" The vendor hesitated, and in that hesitation, Sarah saw everything she needed to know. An innocent man would have immediately agreed. An innocent man would have been eager to show off more of his work. But Gerald Whitmore was calculating, his eyes darting to the left as his brain searched for options. "Actually, those are not quite finished," he said. "The sealant is still curing. They need to sit undisturbed for another 48 hours or the liquid will leak." Max whined softly, a sound Sarah had never heard him make during a detection. She looked down at her partner and saw something in his posture she recognized from the most dangerous situations they had faced together. The dog was warning her. Whatever was in that box, it was serious. "Mr. Whitmore," Sarah said, her voice taking on the hard edge that suspects learn to fear, "I am going to need you to step back from the counter and allow me to examine that box." Gerald's facade cracked completely. His eyes went wide, his hands began to tremble, and he took a step backward that had nothing to do with compliance. His right hand moved toward his pocket. Sarah's training took over. Her weapon cleared the holster before Gerald's hand reached its destination, her stance widening, her voice booming across the market with command authority. "Hands where I can see them. Do it now!" The vendor froze, his face pale, his hand hovering inches from his pocket. Around them shoppers scattered, their screams adding to the chaos. Other officers stationed throughout the market came running, responding to the commotion. But Sarah's focus remained locked on Gerald Whitmore and the box beneath his counter. Slowly, Gerald raised his hands above his head. Sarah moved around the counter with Max at her side, never taking her eyes off the suspect. With her free hand, she reached into his pocket and withdrew a small pistol, a compact 9mm that fit easily in her palm. She secured it in her belt and forced Gerald to his knees, cuffing his hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. Only then did she turn her attention to the box. It was an ordinary cardboard shipping container, the kind used to transport fragile items. Sarah pulled back the tablecloth fully and saw that the box was one of 3, all identical, all bearing shipping labels from an address in Miami. She knelt beside the nearest box, Max pressing close to her side, and carefully opened the flaps. Inside, nestled in protective foam, were 12 snow globes. They looked identical to the ones on display, miniature Atlanta scenes suspended in glittering liquid. But when Sarah lifted one and examined it closely, she noticed something the casual observer would miss. The base of the globe was slightly larger than those on the counter, the proportions just different enough to accommodate additional material. She shook the globe gently and watched the contents swirl. The glitter seemed different somehow, more crystalline, catching the light with sharper edges. And mixed among the artificial snow, she saw particles that did not belong, a fine powder that settled more quickly than the rest, forming a thin layer at the bottom before the liquid currents dispersed it again. Sarah looked at Max, who had not moved from his alert position. "Good boy," she said softly. "Very good boy." She keyed her radio and requested backup, evidence collection, and the presence of the narcotics unit. Whatever was hidden inside these snow globes, it was enough to make a veteran drug detection dog react with an intensity she had rarely seen. This routine patrol had just become something much larger. The next 3 hours transformed the Christmas market into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the Western artisan section, while forensic technicians processed the booth and its contents. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras capturing images that would lead every evening broadcast. Sarah stood at the command post that had been hastily established near the park entrance, briefing Captain Morrison on the situation. The field test came back positive for a synthetic compound, she reported. The lab is running a full analysis now, but the preliminary indication is that it is some kind of designer drug, possibly a fentanyl analog mixed with something else. Each snow globe contains approximately 50 grams of the substance, concealed in a false compartment in the base. Morrison rubbed his forehead, his expression grim. How many globes? 36 in the boxes under the counter, another 24 on display that tested positive. We are looking at a total of 3 kilograms. Street value still being calculated, but potentially in the millions depending on potency. And the vendor, Gerald Whitmore, is not talking. Lawyered up immediately. But his background check is interesting. Sarah pulled out her notepad. He does have a legitimate snow globe business in Dahlonega, been operating for 12 years. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. But his financials show some irregularities, large cash deposits over the past 18 months that do not match his reported sales, multiple trips to Miami that he claimed were for craft supply purchasing, but the timing matches shipments from a known distribution point. Morrison nodded slowly. So he is either a willing participant or someone forced into cooperation. That is what we need to find out. Sarah glanced over at Max, who was resting in the shade of a nearby tree, his alert phase completed. There is something else. The shipping labels on those boxes trace back to a warehouse in Little Havana. That address has appeared in 3 separate DEA investigations over the past 5 years, always in connection with synthetic drug manufacturing, but they have never been able to build a case strong enough for warrants. Until now, Morrison said. Until now. The captain was quiet for a long moment, watching the forensic team work. This is bigger than a market booth, Collins. If these snow globes are the delivery mechanism, there could be hundreds more out there. Christmas markets happen all over the country. If this is a distribution network. Sarah had already considered that possibility. The Christmas market circuit was a perfect cover. Vendors traveled from city to city, their products expected to be transported in bulk, their customer base largely anonymous cash transactions. A sophisticated operation could move enormous quantities of product while hiding in plain sight among legitimate craftspeople. "I want to follow this thread," she said. "Max and I have been working narcotics for 3 years. We know the networks, the players, the patterns. Let us work with the DEA on this." Morrison studied her face. "You just came off a 3-month undercover operation. I put you on market patrol so you could decompress. With respect, Captain, this fell into our laps. Max found it. This is our case." The captain sighed, but Sarah saw the acceptance in his eyes. He knew her too well to argue when she used that tone. "All right, I will make some calls. But you keep me informed every step of the way, and the moment this gets too big for local resources, we hand it off. Understood? Understood." By that evening, Sarah had assembled a task force that included 2 DEA agents, a forensic chemist from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and Detective Marcus Webb from Atlanta PD's Organized Crime Division. They gathered in a conference room at police headquarters, the table covered with evidence photographs, shipping manifests, and preliminary lab reports. The chemist, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, presented her findings first. "What we have here is unlike anything currently in our database. The base compound appears to be a fentanyl derivative, approximately 4 times more potent than standard fentanyl. But it has been combined with a synthetic cathinone, essentially a bath salt variant that accelerates absorption and intensifies hallucinogenic effects. The combination is designed to be maximally addictive while producing a high that users describe as transcendent. Street names we have intercepted in communication intercepts include Crystal Christmas, Snow Angel, and Winter Bliss." The DEA agents, Special Agent Robert Faulkner and Special Agent Diana Reyes, exchanged glances. "We have been tracking references to Winter Bliss for 6 months, Faulkner said. "Never could pin down a source. It kept appearing in Miami, then Houston, then Charlotte, but always in small quantities. We assumed it was a boutique product for high-end users." "It was," Dr. Okonkwo replied, "until now. Based on the quantity recovered today and the sophistication of the concealment method, I believe we are looking at a transition from limited distribution to mass market. The Christmas market circuit provides the perfect opportunity to establish nationwide distribution networks while maintaining plausible deniability." Sarah studied the evidence photos, her mind working through the implications. The snow globes were ingenious. Even if customs or local police inspected them, the drugs were invisible to the naked eye, dissolved in the liquid, and settled into the hidden base compartment. Only a trained detection dog like Max could identify them, and even then, only if given the opportunity to get close enough. "What do we know about the Miami connection?" she asked. Reyes pulled up a file on her laptop. "The warehouse address traces back to a shell company called Tropical Artisan Imports. On paper, they distribute craft supplies and decorative items throughout the Southeast. The actual owner is buried under 3 layers of corporate obscurity, but we have been able to connect the company to a man named Alejandro Vega." She turned the laptop so everyone could see the photograph on screen. Vega appeared to be in his late 50s, silver-haired and distinguished, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. He looked like a businessman, a CEO, someone who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. Nothing about his appearance suggested criminal enterprise. Vega is a ghost, Reyes continued. Born in Cuba, came to the US as a teenager, built a legitimate import-export business that made him wealthy. No criminal record, no known associations with cartel activity, pays his taxes on time, donates to charity. He sits on the board of 3 Miami cultural organizations and is a major donor to local politicians. Sounds like a perfect front, Detective Webb observed. It is. We believe Vega has been running a parallel operation for at least 15 years, using his legitimate business to launder money and move product. But we have never been able to prove it. The man is meticulous. Every time we get close, evidence disappears, witnesses recant, or jurisdictional issues block our progress. Sarah leaned forward. What about Gerald Whitmore? How does he connect to Vega? That is where it gets interesting, Faulkner said. We pulled Whitmore's phone records and found multiple calls to a burner registered in the Miami area. The burner connects to a network of disposable phones that we have been tracking for months. We cannot prove Vega is on the other end, but the pattern matches his known communication methods. And Whitmore himself? Still not talking. His lawyer is Frank Castellano. The name landed in the room like a thunderclap. Sarah recognized it immediately. Castellano was one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the Southeast, a man whose client list read like a who's who of organized crime figures. His involvement suggested that whoever Whitmore worked for had deep pockets and serious connections. Castellano does not come cheap, she said. Someone is protecting Whitmore, or making sure he stays quiet, Webb added grimly. The implications were clear. If Whitmore felt threatened enough to keep silent despite facing federal drug charges, he was more afraid of what would happen if he talked than what would happen if he went to prison. That level of fear usually meant one thing. The people above him were willing to kill to protect themselves. Sarah thought about the Christmas market, the thousands of innocent shoppers who had walked past that booth, the families who had purchased snow globes as gifts without any idea what they contained. Some of those globes had been sold before Max detected the hidden drugs. How many were out there now, sitting under Christmas trees, waiting to be opened? We need to issue a public warning, she said. Anyone who purchased a snow globe from that booth needs to know. Faulkner shook his head. We do that. We tip off the entire network. Every distributor, every courier, every dealer will go to ground. We will never untangle this. And if someone gets hurt, the tension in the room was palpable. Sarah understood the calculus Faulkner was making, the same calculus that made federal investigations so frustrating for local cops. The DEA wanted the big fish. They were willing to let some product reach the streets if it meant building a case that would take down the entire organization. Sarah's priority was the community she served, the people who trusted her to protect them. Before the argument could escalate, Reyes intervened. What if we do both? A targeted recall for the specific snow globes sold at the Atlanta market, framed as a product safety issue rather than a drug investigation. Manufacturing defect, potential glass breakage hazard, something that gives us cover while getting the product off the streets. It was a compromise, imperfect, but workable. Sarah nodded slowly. I can work with that, but we need to move fast on the investigation too. How do we get to Vega? Dr. Okonkwo cleared her throat. I may have a suggestion. The chemical compound in these snow globes has a unique signature. The synthesis process leaves trace markers that are essentially a fingerprint for the manufacturing facility. If we can identify other products containing this compound, we can potentially map the distribution network and trace it back to its source. You mean find other contaminated items? Not contaminated, intentionally dosed. If this organization is using Christmas markets as distribution points, the snow globes may not be the only delivery mechanism. They could be using any number of products that contain liquid or powder components, candles, bath salts, potpourri, anything that could conceivably hold the drug without detection. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather. The Christmas market in Atlanta was just one of dozens operating across the country. If this network had infiltrated others, the scope of the operation could be enormous. "Max and I will start with the Atlanta vendors," she said. "We will screen every booth in the market. If there are other contaminated products, we will find them. And we will start tracing the supply chain from Miami," Faulkner added. "Vega may be careful, but everyone makes mistakes. We just need to find his." The meeting broke up with assignments distributed and communication protocols established. Sarah collected Max from the break room where he had been resting and headed for her car. The sun had set hours ago, and the city was dressed in Christmas lights, every street lamp and storefront glittering with holiday decorations. It should have been beautiful. Instead, Sarah saw only potential hiding places for poison. Max settled into his compartment in the back of the patrol vehicle, his eyes already closed before she started the engine. The day had been long for both of them, but tomorrow would be longer. Sarah pulled out of the parking garage and headed for home, her mind already planning the systematic sweep of the Christmas market that would begin at dawn. Her apartment was a modest two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood near Grant Park, chosen specifically for its fenced backyard where Max could run. Sarah had lived there for 5 years, since her divorce from a fellow officer who could not handle the demands of her career. The marriage had lasted 3 years. Her partnership with Max had lasted 7 and showed no signs of strain. She fed Max first, and always, measuring out his kibble with the precision required for a working dog's diet. He ate methodically, without the enthusiasm of a pet, then drank deeply from his water bowl before settling onto his bed in the corner of the living room. Sarah made herself a sandwich she did not taste and stood at the window, looking out at the Christmas lights her neighbors had strung along their porches. Somewhere out there, in some home in Atlanta or beyond, a family would open a snow globe purchased from Gerald Whitmore's booth. They would shake it and watch the glitter swirl, never knowing that the beautiful winter scene contained enough synthetic poison to kill them. The thought made her stomach clench. Her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Webb. Whitmore made bail. Castellano pulled strings with a judge. They are releasing him tonight. Sarah stared at the message, her jaw tightening. Bail on federal drug charges was unusual. Bail within hours of arrest was almost unheard of. Whoever was protecting Whitmore had serious influence over the judicial system, the kind of influence that came from years of careful cultivation and substantial financial investment. She texted back, "Put surveillance on him? Already done. 2 unmarked units." It was something, but Sarah knew it might not be enough. If Whitmore's handlers decided he was a liability, surveillance would not stop a professional hit. She had seen it happen before. A defendant released on bail, found dead within days, the case suddenly without its key witness. She slept poorly that night. Her dreams filled with snow globes shattering and releasing clouds of white powder that filled the air like toxic snowfall. Max woke her twice, pressing his cold nose against her hand, sensing her distress even in sleep. Each time she stroked his fur until her heartbeat slowed, then lay awake staring at the ceiling until exhaustion pulled her under again. Dawn came grey and cold, clouds moving in from the west with the promise of rare Atlanta snow. Sarah was at the Christmas market by 7 before most vendors had arrived, accompanied by Max and 3 additional K-9 teams borrowed from neighboring jurisdictions. Captain Morrison had pulled strings to get the resources, recognizing that a systematic sweep of 200 booths would take days with a single dog. The market management had been briefed on the situation, though not the full details. They knew only that a vendor had been arrested for illegal activity and that police needed to conduct safety inspections of all products. The management had cooperated fully, providing vendor lists, booth assignments, and access to areas normally closed to the public. Sarah started with the booths nearest to Whitmore's location, reasoning that if he had co-conspirators among the vendors, they would likely be positioned close to him for easy communication. Max worked methodically, moving from booth to booth, his nose sampling the air and the merchandise with systematic precision. The other K-9 teams spread out to cover different sections of the market, their handlers reporting regularly via radio. By noon, they had cleared 73 booths without incident. Max had shown interest in a few items: a scented candle that turned out to contain marijuana-infused wax, clearly for personal use, and a jar of organic honey that the vendor admitted was not properly licensed for sale. Minor violations, nothing connected to the snow globe operation. Then they reached booth 117, a modest setup selling handcrafted jewelry and decorative boxes. The vendor was a woman in her 60s, grey-haired and grandmotherly, wearing a hand-knitted cardigan covered in embroidered snowflakes. Her merchandise appeared innocent enough: silver earrings and delicate necklaces, wooden boxes with inlaid patterns. Nothing that should attract a drug detection dog's attention, but Max stopped in front of her display and sat down. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she studied the booth. The woman smiled nervously, her hands fluttering like anxious birds. "Is something wrong, officer?" she asked. Her voice had a slight tremor. "Just a routine inspection, ma'am. May I see some identification?" The woman produced a driver's license that identified her as Martha Hensley, age 64, resident of Marietta. Her vendor permit was in order, her booth rental paid through the end of the market. Everything appeared legitimate. But Max had not moved. Sarah turned her attention to the wooden boxes, examining each one carefully. They were beautifully crafted, with intricate inlay work depicting holiday scenes, snowflakes and reindeer and Christmas trees. The prices ranged from $40 to $200, reasonable for handmade artisan work. She opened one of the larger boxes and found it empty, lined with velvet to hold jewelry or keepsakes. The second box was similarly benign, but when she picked up the third, she noticed immediately that it was heavier than it should be. "Ma'am, what is inside this box?" Martha Hensley's smile crumbled. Her face went pale, and she gripped the edge of her table as if to keep herself from falling. "I do not know what you mean," she whispered. "It is just a decorative box." Sarah ran her fingers along the interior of the box and found what Max had detected: a false bottom, cleverly concealed, that added a hidden compartment beneath the velvet lining. She pressed in the right place and felt the panel give way, revealing a space filled with small cellophane packets containing white crystalline powder. Martha Hensley began to cry. The arrest took less than 5 minutes. Backup officers escorted the elderly woman to a waiting patrol car while forensic technicians documented the evidence. Sarah watched her go, feeling no satisfaction in the collar. Martha Hensley did not fit the profile of a drug dealer. She looked like someone's grandmother, the kind of woman who baked cookies for neighborhood children and attended church every Sunday. But looks could deceive. Sarah had learned that lesson many times over. The inventory of Martha's booth revealed 15 boxes with hidden compartments, each containing between 10 and 20 grams of the same compound found in the snow globes. The total haul was smaller than Whitmore's operation, but the implications were larger. This was confirmation that the network extended beyond a single vendor, that multiple distribution points had been established within the same market. How many more, she wondered? How many other sweet-looking grandmothers and friendly craftsmen were moving poison disguised as Christmas cheer? Her radio crackled with reports from the other K-9 teams. 2 more positive hits, booths 142 and 191. By the end of the day, the sweep had identified 5 compromised vendors, all selling different products, all with hidden compartments or false bottoms containing the same synthetic compound. The Christmas market had become a drug supermarket, its festive facade hiding a distribution network of staggering scope. The evening news led with the story. Sarah watched the broadcast from the task force conference room, surrounded by evidence boxes and exhausted colleagues. The reporter spoke gravely about the drug crisis infiltrating beloved holiday traditions, parents clutching their children closer, community trust betrayed. They showed footage of the market, the yellow tape and police vehicles, the stunned faces of legitimate vendors whose livelihoods had been disrupted by association. Gerald Whitmore's face appeared on screen, identified as the first arrest. Then Martha Hensley, looking confused and frail in her booking photo. The other three vendors appeared in quick succession, their names and images now public record. Sarah studied each face, looking for connections, trying to understand how such different people had ended up in the same conspiracy. One of the arrested vendors was a young man named Tyler Brooks, 26 years old, selling carved wooden ornaments. Another was a middle-aged couple, the Delaney's, who specialized in homemade jams and preserves, their product concealed inside decorative jar lids that contained false compartments. The fifth was a woman named Rebecca Shaw, 41, who sold handmade soap bars with drugs pressed into their centers. "We need to understand their recruitment," Sarah said. "These people do not look like career criminals. Someone brought them into this network. Someone convinced them to participate." Detective Webb pulled up the background files. "You are right. No criminal records for any of them. All have legitimate businesses that have been operating for years. All have had financial difficulties in the past 2 years. Whitmore had hospital bills from his wife's cancer treatment. Hensley lost her retirement savings in a bad investment. Brooks had student loan debt. The Delaneys almost lost their farm. Shaw went through an expensive divorce, so they targeted vulnerable people," Special Agent Reyes observed, "offered them a way out of financial trouble in exchange for cooperation. Classic recruitment strategy," Faulkner agreed. "Find people who are desperate, give them a lifeline, then own them. They cannot go to the police because they are already complicit." Sarah thought about Martha Hensley crying as they led her away. The woman had made terrible choices, but she had not made them in a vacuum. Someone had exploited her desperation, used her need against her, turned a grandmother into a drug mule. The real criminals were the ones who had constructed this system, who had identified vulnerable targets and manipulated them into service. "We need to flip one of them," she said. "Get someone to talk about who approached them, how the network operates, where the product comes from." "Easier said than done," Faulkner replied. "Whitmore has been released and is not cooperating. The others are all represented by lawyers from the same firm, Castellanos Associates. They have clearly been instructed to stay silent." "Then we need leverage," Sarah said, "something that makes talking more attractive than staying quiet." The break came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the market sweep, Dr. Okonkwo called Sarah with news. "We finished the full analysis of the compound," she said, her voice carrying an edge of excitement. "And I found something interesting. The synthesis process leaves trace markers, like I mentioned before. But these markers are not just fingerprints for the manufacturing facility. They're timestamps. Timestamps. The chemical degradation of certain precursor compounds follows a predictable pattern. By measuring the ratio of these compounds, I can estimate when the drug was manufactured. All the product we recovered from the Atlanta market was made within the same 2-week window, approximately 6 weeks ago. Sarah processed the information, so we are looking at a single production batch. Exactly. And there is more. One of the trace compounds is highly unusual, a catalyst that is only produced by a handful of chemical suppliers worldwide. I tracked down the source. It is a company in Eastern Europe that sells to exactly 3 customers in the Western Hemisphere. Who are the customers? 2 pharmaceutical research facilities, both legitimate, both with DEA oversight and documentation, and one company called Global Chemical Solutions, registered in Panama with a shipping address in Miami. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. Let me guess. The Miami address is near the tropical artisan imports warehouse. Same building, different suite. This was it. The connection they needed, the thread that would unravel the entire network. Sarah thanked Dr. Okonkwo and immediately called Faulkner and Reyes. Within an hour, they had convened an emergency meeting of the task force. Global Chemical Solutions is a shell company, Faulkner confirmed after running his own checks. Registered 18 months ago. No employees, no office presence, just a mail drop. But the shipping records show regular deliveries from the European supplier, quantities consistent with large-scale drug manufacturing. This gives us probable cause for warrants, Reyes said. We can hit both the warehouse and the shell company location. We need to do it simultaneously, Sarah insisted. If we tip them off by hitting one location first, they will clean out the other. The planning took 2 more days. Federal prosecutors reviewed the evidence and approved warrant applications. A joint operation was organized involving DEA, FBI, Atlanta PD, and Miami-Dade Police. The strikes would happen at dawn on December 21st, 4 days before Christmas, coordinated down to the minute. Sarah and Max were assigned to the Atlanta component of the operation. While federal teams hit the Miami locations, local task force members would execute a warrant on a secondary warehouse in College Park that shipping records had linked to the tropical artisan imports network. Intelligence suggested it served as a regional distribution hub, the place where products were received from Miami and prepared for delivery to market vendors. The night before the operation, Sarah could not sleep. She lay in bed with Max pressed against her side, his warmth and steady breathing her only comfort. Tomorrow would be dangerous. Warehouse raids always carried risk, the possibility of armed resistance, of suspects desperate enough to fight rather than face arrest. She had done this many times before, but the anxiety never fully faded. It kept her sharp. At 4 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and began her preparations. She checked her weapon, loaded extra magazines, verified her radio and body armor. Max sensed the change in her demeanor and paced excitedly, recognizing the pre-operation ritual that meant action was coming. They arrived at the staging area at 5:30. The College Park warehouse was a nondescript industrial building in a district full of similar structures. The kind of anonymous facility that handled thousands of legitimate shipments every year. Nothing about its exterior suggested criminal activity, but the shipping manifests did not lie. Captain Morrison briefed the assembled team, 12 officers, including Sarah and Max, plus 2 additional K-9 units. They would breach from multiple entry points simultaneously, a tactic designed to prevent suspects from fleeing or destroying evidence. Sarah's assignment was the main loading dock, the most likely location for bulk product storage. At 6:15, their radios crackled with confirmation from Miami. Federal teams had successfully breached both target locations. Multiple arrests were in progress. Evidence was being secured. It was their turn. Morrison gave the signal. The teams moved. Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as she advanced toward the loading dock with Max at her side. The door was reinforced steel, requiring a breaching charge to open. The explosion echoed across the industrial park. A thunderous boom, followed by the crash of metal hitting concrete. Smoke billowed from the doorway as Sarah and her team poured through. "Police! Search warrant! Everyone on the ground!" The interior of the warehouse was larger than expected, filled with rows of metal shelving stacked with cardboard boxes. Christmas decorations hung incongruously from the ceiling. Strings of lights and tinsel that created a surreal contrast to the tactical operation unfolding below. A forklift sat abandoned in one aisle, its engine still running, suggesting they had interrupted someone in the middle of work. Sarah cleared the first section with Max, his nose working overtime as they moved between the shelves. The boxes contained exactly what shipping records had suggested. Snow globes, decorative boxes, candles, soaps, all the same products recovered from the compromised market vendors. This was the supply hub, the place where innocent-looking merchandise was transformed into drug delivery vehicles. "Contact!" someone shouted from the far end of the warehouse. Sarah heard the crack of gunfire, followed by the distinctive bark of return fire from her colleagues. She moved toward the sound with Max, her weapon ready, her senses hyper-alert. They rounded a corner and encountered chaos. 3 men had barricaded themselves behind a stack of pallets, firing at officers who had taken cover behind a delivery truck. One of the shooters had what looked like an automatic weapon, spraying bullets in wild arcs that shredded boxes and sparked off metal shelving. Sarah saw one of her colleagues go down, clutching his shoulder, his partner dragging him to cover. She keyed her radio. "Officer down, northwest corner. We have 3 armed suspects, at least one with automatic capability. Request backup and medical." The response came back immediately, en route. Max was pressed against her leg, awaiting command. In situations like this, sending a dog against armed suspects was a last resort, the risk of losing a K-9 partner too great, except in dire circumstances. But Max was trained for this, had faced gunfire before, and Sarah knew his capabilities better than she knew her own. A lull in the shooting gave her an opening. She moved from cover to cover, advancing on the barricade from an angle the shooters could not easily defend. Max moved with her, silent and deadly, his body low to the ground. When they were within 20 feet of the pallets, Sarah saw her chance. One of the shooters had exposed himself to reload, his attention focused on the officers he had pinned down. Sarah took aim and fired twice. The man crumpled. The remaining 2 shooters panicked, their discipline breaking down. One tried to run and was immediately tackled by officers who had circled behind the barricade. The third turned his weapon towards Sarah. She saw the barrel swing in her direction and knew she could not fire in time. But Max was already moving, 80 pounds of Belgian Malinois launched through the air, jaws closing on the shooter's gun arm with crushing force. The man screamed as Max brought him down, the automatic weapon clattering harmlessly across the concrete floor. Sarah was on them in seconds, securing the suspect while Max maintained his grip. "Down! Stay down!" She cuffed the man and gave Max the release command. He let go immediately, stepping back with blood on his muzzle, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of a job well done. The warehouse was secured within minutes. 3 suspects in custody, 1 dead, 1 officer wounded but stable. And everywhere they looked, evidence of the drug operation that had corrupted Atlanta's Christmas market. The inventory took hours, thousands of products, all laced with the synthetic compound, ready for distribution to markets across the Southeast. Shipping manifests revealed planned deliveries to Christmas markets in Charlotte, Nashville, Jacksonville, and Birmingham. The network extended far beyond Atlanta, a regional operation that had been preparing for its biggest season yet. But the most significant discovery came from a locked office in the corner of the warehouse. Inside, officers found computers, financial records, and communication logs that laid bare the entire organization. Names, dates, bank accounts, distribution routes, everything a prosecutor needed to build airtight cases against dozens of conspirators. And at the center of it all, referenced again and again in encrypted messages and coded communications, was Alejandro Vega. The Miami raids had been equally productive. Federal agents had arrested 11 people, including several of Vega's known associates. They had seized manufacturing equipment, precursor chemicals, and several $1 million in cash. But Vega himself had not been at either location. The man they most wanted had slipped through the net. Sarah received the news with frustration but not surprise. Men like Vega did not expose themselves to direct risk. They operated through layers of intermediaries, insulated from the dirty work that kept their empires running. Taking him down would require patience, careful building of evidence. the slow construction of an unassailable case. But they had wounded him. His network was in tatters, his distribution channels exposed, his carefully cultivated vendors facing decades in federal prison. The Christmas market operation was finished, and the damage to his organization would take years to repair. On the evening of December 23rd, Sarah sat in her apartment with Max at her feet, watching coverage of the arrests. Authorities had issued the public warning that Faulkner had initially resisted, recalling all products from the compromised vendors and urging anyone who had purchased items to contact police. Hotlines were flooded with calls. So far, no overdoses had been reported. A small miracle of timing and luck. Her phone rang. It was Captain Morrison. "Just got word from the feds," he said. "They picked up Alejandro Vega 30 minutes ago, trying to cross into Mexico at a private airfield near San Antonio. He is in custody and being transported to Miami for arraignment." Sarah closed her eyes and let out a breath she had been holding for days. "Good," she said. "That is good. You did hell of a work, Collins. You and Max both. Get some rest. You have earned it." After the call ended, Sarah knelt beside Max and wrapped her arms around his neck. The dog leaned into her embrace, his tail wagging slowly. He did not understand the significance of what they had accomplished, the lives that would be saved by their actions. He only knew that his handler was happy, and that was enough. Christmas Eve dawned bright and cold. Sarah had taken the day off, her first real rest in weeks, and spent the morning at the park with Max, throwing a tennis ball until her arm ached and his tongue hung out from exhaustion. They walked home through streets decorated with wreaths and lights, past houses where families were gathering to celebrate. The Christmas market had reopened, cleared of the compromised vendors, its reputation battered but not destroyed. Legitimate craftspeople had rallied together, their collective outrage at being associated with criminals channeled into renewed commitment to their community. Sales were down from previous years, but the spirit of the market survived. Sarah stopped by in the afternoon, walking among the booths with Max at her side. Vendors who recognized her called out greetings, thanking her for removing the bad actors who had threatened to destroy everything they had built. Children pointed at Max with delight, and their parents smiled at the handsome police dog who had made headlines across the country. At the center of the market, a new booth had been set up, selling ornaments with proceeds going to a fund for drug addiction treatment. Sarah bought one, a simple glass ball painted with the Atlanta skyline, and tucked it into her pocket. That evening, she attended a small gathering at Captain Morrison's house, a tradition for officers without family obligations on the holiday. Max came too, immediately making friends with Morrison's golden retriever, and spent the evening being spoiled with treats by colleagues who knew he deserved everyone. Sarah sat by the window watching snow begin to fall. Real snow, not artificial, drifting down from a grey sky in fat, lazy flakes that turned the city into a Christmas card. It happened rarely enough in Atlanta to feel like a miracle. She thought about the case, about Whitmore and Hensley and all the others who had made terrible choices under terrible pressure. About Vega, now sitting in a federal detention facility, his empire crumbling around him. About the anonymous victims who would never know how close they had come to tragedy. The families who would open gifts tomorrow without any idea that their presents had once been vehicles for poison. Max padded over and rested his head on her knee. Sarah stroked his ears, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. 7 years together, hundreds of cases, countless dangers faced and overcome. He was more than a partner. He was family. "Merry Christmas, Max," she said softly. His tail wagged once, twice. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Atlanta, blanketing the city in white, washing away the sins of the season, promising a fresh start for the year to come. Sarah watched until her eyes grew heavy, then let sleep take her. Secure in the knowledge that she had done her job, that justice had been served, that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. The story of the Christmas market would be told for years to come. How a routine patrol had uncovered a massive drug network, how a dog's instincts had saved countless lives, how the partnership between a woman and her K-9 had protected a city during its most vulnerable season. But Sarah did not think about legacy or reputation. She thought about the work, about the next case, the next threat, the next chance to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. It was why she had become a cop, why she had joined the K-9 unit, why she got up every morning and put on the uniform. Max shifted in his sleep, his paws twitching as he dreamed of chasing tennis balls or tracking suspects through warehouses. Sarah smiled and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now, she rested. The aftermath of the Christmas market operation stretched well into the new year. Prosecutors worked around the clock to process the mountain of evidence recovered from the warehouse raid and the Miami seizures. Alejandro Vega was formally indicted on 37 federal charges, including drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, and RICO violations. His trial was scheduled for March, and though legal experts predicted years of motions and appeals before any final resolution. Sarah returned to regular duty in January, but the case continued to demand her attention. She testified before a grand jury, provided depositions for federal prosecutors, and consulted with investigators who were still unraveling the full extent of Vega's network. The snow globe operation had been larger than anyone initially suspected, with distribution points identified in 14 states and connections to suppliers in 3 foreign countries. Gerald Whitmore, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of life in prison, eventually agreed to cooperate. His testimony filled in crucial gaps in the prosecution's case, explaining how vendors were recruited, how products were modified to conceal drugs, and how payments were laundered through a complex web of shell companies. In exchange for his cooperation, prosecutors recommended a reduced sentence of 12 years. Martha Hensley received similar consideration. The elderly woman's tearful account of being approached during her darkest hour offered a way out of financial ruin that seemed too good to question, became a cautionary tale used in public awareness campaigns. She would spend 5 years in federal prison, a grandmother who had made one catastrophic mistake when desperation clouded her judgment. The other arrested vendors received varying sentences based on their level of involvement and willingness to cooperate. Tyler Brooks, the young ornament maker, turned state's evidence and received probation with mandatory drug treatment. The Delaney's, who had been more deeply involved in the logistics of the operation, faced 10 years each. Rebecca Shaw, whose soap bars had contained some of the highest drug concentrations, was sentenced to 15 years after refusing any deal. Throughout the legal proceedings, Sarah continued her regular duties with the K-9 unit. Max showed no signs of slowing down. Despite approaching his 8th birthday, his enthusiasm for work undiminished. They responded to calls across Atlanta, tracked suspects through urban jungles and suburban neighborhoods, detected drugs at traffic stops and school inspections. The rhythm of their partnership remained constant, a dance perfected through years of practice. In February, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at headquarters. A woman in her late 20s, well-dressed and nervous, asked to speak with the officer who had led the Christmas market investigation. Sarah agreed to meet her in an interview room, curious about what she might want. The woman introduced herself as Christina Vega, Alejandro's daughter. Sarah felt her guard go up immediately. Christina must have sensed it because she raised her hands in a gesture of surrender. "I'm not here to threaten you or try to influence the case," she said. "I am here to thank you." Sarah said nothing, waiting for an explanation. Christina took a deep breath. I did not know what my father was doing. I knew he was a businessman, import-export, nothing unusual. He kept that part of his life completely separate from our family. I only learned the truth when I saw it on the news. She paused, composing herself. My mother died of an overdose when I was 12. Prescription painkillers that escalated to heroin. My father was devastated. He swore he would never have anything to do with drugs, that he understood the pain they caused, and I believed him. I believed him for 15 years. Tears began to stream down Christina's face. She wiped them away impatiently, to find out he was responsible for spreading the same poison that killed my mother. I cannot describe what that felt like. But I needed you to know that what you did, what you and your dog did, it mattered, not just for the people you saved, but for people like me who needed to know the truth, even when the truth was devastating. Sarah considered the woman across the table. Cristina Vega had every reason to hate her, to blame her for destroying her family's reputation and sending her father to prison. Instead, she had come to express gratitude. It was, Sarah thought, one of the more remarkable things she had encountered in her career. Thank you for telling me that, she said finally. I know it could not have been easy. Cristina nodded. What will happen to him? My father? That is up to the courts. But the evidence is substantial. I expect he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Cristina absorbed this without visible reaction. She had clearly come to terms with the likelihood already. Then I hope he uses that time to think about what he did, about who he hurt, about the memory of my mother he betrayed. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Your dog, she said. Max. Is he well? Sarah smiled despite herself. He is. He is very well. Good. Christina's expression softened slightly. He saved lives. Please give him a treat from me. She left without waiting for a response. Sarah sat alone in the interview room for a long moment, thinking about the strange paths that life took, the unexpected connections between hunter and hunted, the ripples that spread outward from every action and every choice. When she returned to her desk, Max was waiting, tail wagging, ready for whatever came next. Sarah knelt beside him and pressed her forehead to his. You did good, partner, she whispered. You did real good. March brought the beginning of Alejandro Vega's trial. Sarah attended the opening statements, sitting in the gallery with other law enforcement officers who had contributed to the case. The courtroom was packed, media outlets having covered every development with intense interest. Vega sat at the defense table in a designer suit, looking more like a corporate executive than a drug kingpin. His expensive legal team surrounded him like guards protecting a monarch. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the evidence in methodical detail. Financial records, communication intercepts, witness testimony, forensic analysis of the drugs themselves. The case was overwhelming, a mountain of proof that would have buried lesser defendants without trace. But Vega's lawyers were skilled at creating doubt, at finding inconsistencies in witness statements and questioning the chain of evidence custody. They painted their client as a successful businessman victimized by ambitious prosecutors and overzealous police. They suggested that Vega had been unaware of illegal activities conducted by subordinates, that he was guilty at most of failing to properly supervise his employees. Sarah watched the defense presentation with growing frustration. She knew the truth. She had seen the evidence, had helped build the case piece by piece. Vega was guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. But trials were theater, and talented performers could make even the clearest truth seem murky. The trial stretched through March and into April. Witnesses testified and were cross-examined. Experts explained chemical analyses and financial transactions. Photographs and documents were entered into evidence. The jury sat impassively through it all, their faces revealing nothing of their thoughts. Sarah testified on the third week, spending 2 days on the witness stand, describing the initial discovery at the Christmas market and the subsequent investigation. Vega's lead attorney, a silver-tongued litigator named Harrison Blackwell, tried repeatedly to undermine her credibility. He suggested that Max had been poorly trained, that the K-9's alerts were unreliable, that the entire case had been built on the mistaken instincts of a dog. Sarah remained calm under his attacks. She explained Max's training, his certification, his track record of accurate detections. She described the systematic process by which alerts were verified and evidence was collected. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she had witnessed and exactly what it meant. By the time she left the stand, even Blackwell seemed to recognize that his strategy had failed. The jury had watched Sarah Collins with something like admiration. She was credible, professional, unshakable. And behind her testimony stood the evidence, the irrefutable proof that Vega's organization had flooded communities with poison disguised as Christmas cheer. The verdict came on April 17th, guilty on all 37 counts. Sarah was in her car, returning from a routine patrol, when she heard the news on the radio. She pulled over and sat in silence as the announcer described the scene in the courtroom. Vega showing no emotion as the verdicts were read, his daughter Christina crying in the gallery, the prosecutors shaking hands and accepting congratulations. Sentencing would come later, but the outcome was now certain. Alejandro Vega would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. His empire was destroyed. His legacy was ruin. Sarah reached into the back seat and scratched Max behind the ears. "We got him, buddy," she said. "We got him." Max's tail thumped against the seat. He did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. His handler was happy. That was enough. Life returned to normal, or what passed for normal in police work. Sarah and Max continued their duties, responding to calls, conducting searches, training with other K-9 teams. The Christmas market case faded from headlines as new stories captured public attention. Other crimes demanded investigation. Other threats required response. But the impact of what they had accomplished lingered in ways both visible and subtle. The department established new protocols for monitoring public events, recognizing the vulnerability that the case had exposed. Law enforcement agencies across the country increased scrutiny of Christmas markets and similar venues. The DEA launched a national initiative to identify and disrupt drug distribution networks that exploited seasonal commerce. And in Atlanta, the Christmas market continued. The following December, Sarah and Max were assigned to patrol duty once again. They walked among the booths, past vendors selling crafts and treats and decorations. The market had recovered from the scandal, its reputation restored through time and careful management. Families shopped and laughed and enjoyed the holiday atmosphere. Sarah stopped at a booth selling handmade ornaments and purchased a glass ball painted with a scene of a police officer and her K-9 partner. The vendor, a young artist who had read about the case, had created the design specifically to honor the officers who had protected the market. "For you," Sarah said, holding the ornament up for Max to see. The dog sniffed it curiously, then lost interest and returned to scanning the crowd. Always working, even during moments of celebration. That was Max. That was who he was. Sarah tucked the ornament into her pocket and continued her patrol. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the market's lights were beginning to glow. Christmas music played from speakers hidden among the decorations. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine. This was what she protected. This joy, this community, this celebration of hope and connection. The shadows would always exist, the predators who sought to corrupt and destroy, but so would the guardians who stood against them, the officers and agents and ordinary citizens who refused to let darkness triumph. Sarah Collins and K-9 Max were two of those guardians. They would continue their work for as long as they were able, facing whatever challenges arose, protecting the innocent from those who would do them harm. The snow globe operation had been one case among many. There would be others. There always were. But today, on this December evening, the Christmas market was safe, the families were happy, the season was bright, and that was enough. As darkness fell over Atlanta, Sarah completed her patrol and returned to headquarters. She filed her reports, fed Max his dinner, and prepared to go home. The shift was ending, another day protected. Walking to her car through the parking lot, she paused to look up at the sky. Stars were emerging, faint points of light fighting through the urban glow. Somewhere out there, beyond the city lights, the universe continued its ancient dance, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs. But here on the ground, those struggles mattered, those triumphs meant something. Every arrest, every intervention, every moment when justice prevailed over criminality was a victory worth celebrating. Sarah opened the back door of her vehicle, and Max jumped in, settling into his familiar position. She climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The radio crackled with routine traffic, other officers handling other calls, the endless pulse of a city that never truly slept. Home beckoned, rest awaited. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, Sarah Collins drove through Atlanta with her partner at her side, satisfied with the day's work, grateful for the partnership that made her effective, ready for whatever came next. The Christmas market lights faded in her rearview mirror, a glowing reminder of what they had saved. Sarah smiled and accelerated into the night, carrying with her the knowledge that she had made a difference. It was, she thought, the best Christmas gift of all. The city sprawled around her, vast and complex, full of stories both bright and dark. She was just one officer in a department of thousands, protecting a community of millions. But she was not just anyone. She was the officer who had stopped at a snow globe booth because her dog told her something was wrong. She was the detective who had followed the thread from a Christmas market to a drug kingpin's empire. She was the guardian who had faced armed suspects and brought them to justice. And beside her, always beside her, was Max, the Belgian Malinois who could detect what no human could sense. The partner who trusted her completely, and whom she trusted in return. The four-legged hero who had saved lives simply by doing what he had been trained to do. Their story would continue. There were more cases to solve, more criminals to catch, more communities to protect. The work never ended. But on this night, driving home through streets decorated with holiday lights, Sarah Collins allowed herself to feel proud of Max, proud of her team. Proud of what they had accomplished together. The snow globe case was closed. The guilty were punished. The innocent were safe. Tomorrow would bring something new, and they would be ready. The weeks following Vega's conviction brought a flurry of activity that kept Sarah and Max busier than ever. Word of the Christmas market case had spread through law enforcement circles nationwide, and requests poured in from departments seeking advice on how to detect similar operations. Sarah found herself giving presentations at conferences, consulting with federal task forces, and training other K-9 units on the specific techniques that had led to the initial discovery. Max became something of a celebrity in his own right. A local television station produced a short documentary about the K-9 unit, featuring extensive footage of Max demonstrating his detection capabilities. The segment went viral, shared millions of times on social media, turning the Belgian Malinois into an unlikely internet star. Sarah received bags of fan mail addressed to Max, including treats, toys, and hand-drawn portraits from admirers around the world. She kept the best of these mementos in a box at home, amused by the attention, but careful not to let it affect their work. Max remained oblivious to his fame, caring nothing for likes or shares, focused only on the job he had been trained to do. His humility, if a dog could be said to possess such a quality, was one of the things Sarah loved most about him. The spring brought new cases that demanded their full attention. A series of warehouse burglaries targeting pharmaceutical distributors led to a complex investigation involving multiple jurisdictions. Max tracked suspects across miles of urban terrain, his nose leading them through alleys and parking structures and abandoned buildings until they cornered the perpetrators in an empty factory south of the city. The arrests made headlines, though smaller ones than the Christmas market case, and Sarah added another commendation to her growing collection. Summer arrived with scorching heat that made outdoor work challenging for both humans and dogs. The department adjusted K-9 patrol schedules to avoid the hottest hours, protecting the animals from heat exhaustion while maintaining coverage. Sarah used the lighter workload to catch up on administrative duties she'd been neglecting, filing reports and updating training records and attending meetings that had accumulated during the intense months of investigation. She also took Max for a comprehensive veterinary examination, something she did twice yearly to ensure her partner remained in peak condition. The vet, a specialist in working dogs who had been caring for Max since his earliest days on the force, pronounced him healthy and fit. There were minor signs of aging, some wear on his joints, a slight decrease in lung capacity, but nothing that would affect his ability to work. The vet estimated Max could continue active duty for another 2 to 3 years before retirement became necessary. Sarah received this news with mixed emotions. She was relieved that Max remained capable, proud of his resilience and conditioning. But the reminder that their partnership had a finite horizon cast a shadow over even the brightest days. She could not imagine working without him, could not picture her life without his presence at her side. The bond between a handler and a K-9 was unlike any other relationship, a connection forged through danger and triumph and the daily intimacy of absolute trust. She pushed these thoughts aside and focused on the present. There would be time to contemplate the future when it arrived. For now, Max was healthy and eager to work, and there were still criminals to catch. The fall brought a case that tested their partnership in unexpected ways. A series of anonymous tips had alerted the department to possible drug activity in a wealthy suburb north of the city, an area not typically associated with narcotics trafficking. Initial investigations turned up nothing conclusive, but the tips continued, detailed enough to suggest insider knowledge, yet vague enough to frustrate surveillance efforts. Sarah and Max were assigned to conduct a discreet sweep of the suspected area, their presence explained as a routine community outreach patrol. They drove through tree-lined streets past mansions that cost more than Sarah would earn in a decade, past manicured lawns and luxury vehicles, and all the trappings of extreme wealth. It seemed an unlikely setting for drug activity, but Sarah knew that appearances often deceived. Crime respected no boundaries of class or geography. Max showed no interest in the first dozen properties they passed. His posture relaxed, his attention wandering. But as they approached a massive estate at the end of a cul-de-sac, his demeanor changed. The dog sat up straighter, his ears pricked forward, his nose working the air with sudden intensity. Sarah pulled the patrol vehicle to the curb and watched him carefully. "You smell something, buddy?" Max whined softly, the same sound he had made at the Christmas market when he detected the snow globes. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She keyed her radio and requested backup, then settled in to wait. The estate belonged to a man named Harrison Blackwell III, heir to a manufacturing fortune and prominent figure in Atlanta society. His name was familiar to Sarah, though she could not immediately place why. She ran a background check while waiting for backup and found nothing remarkable. No criminal record, no known associations with illegal activity, just a wealthy man living quietly in his inherited mansion. Then she remembered. Harrison Blackwell, the attorney who had defended Alejandro Vega at trial, the silver-tongued litigator who had tried to discredit her testimony and undermine the case she had helped build. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, 2 additional patrol units that parked at discreet distances to avoid alerting the residents. Sarah briefed the officers on Max's reaction and her suspicions about the connection to the Vega case. They agreed that further investigation was warranted, but recognized the sensitivity of targeting a prominent attorney without concrete evidence. A compromise was reached. Sarah would approach the estate under the pretense of responding to a noise complaint, giving her legal justification to be on the property and allowing Max to conduct a closer inspection. If the dog alerted more strongly, they would have probable cause for a warrant. If he showed no further interest, they would withdraw and pursue other avenues of investigation. Sarah walked up the long driveway with Max at her side, her badge visible on her belt, her posture deliberately casual. The mansion loomed ahead, a Georgian revival structure that looked like it belonged on the cover of an architecture magazine. Gardens flanked the approach, winter dormant but meticulously maintained, and a fountain stood silent in the center of a circular drive. She rang the doorbell and waited. After a long moment, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, wearing clothing that probably cost more than Sarah's car. The woman looked at Sarah with an expression of polite confusion that bordered on disdain. "May I help you, officer?" "Good evening, ma'am. We received a noise complaint from this area and are doing a routine check. Is everything all right here?" The woman's expression shifted to something more guarded. "Noise complaint? There has been no noise here. We value our privacy and maintain strict quiet hours. I understand. Would you mind if we took a quick look around the exterior of the property, just to document that we responded to the complaint?" The woman hesitated. Sarah saw her calculating, weighing the risks of refusal against the risks of cooperation. Finally, she stepped back. "I will need to consult with my husband. Please wait here." She disappeared into the house, leaving the door slightly ajar. Sarah remained on the threshold, her senses alert. Max pressed against her leg. The dog's tension had not diminished. If anything, his posture suggested even stronger interest now that they were closer to the building. Several minutes passed. Then the door opened wider, and Harrison Blackwell III stepped into view. Sarah recognized him immediately from the trial. He was older than he had appeared in the courtroom, his face more lined, his hair more gray. But his eyes held the same sharp intelligence, the same calculating assessment that had made him such a formidable opponent on the witness stand. "Lieutenant Collins," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "What an unexpected pleasure. Mr. Blackwell." Sarah kept her tone neutral. "We are responding to a noise complaint in the area." "Are you?" Blackwell's smile did not reach his eyes. "Or are you engaged in a fishing expedition connected to your recent case against my former client?" Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I am responding to a reported disturbance, sir." "Nothing more. Then you will have no objection to leaving my property immediately. No noise has originated from this address, and I do not consent to any search or inspection." The confrontation hung in the air between them. Sarah knew she was on thin legal ice. Without Max making a clear alert, without any evidence visible from where she stood, she had no basis to push further. Blackwell was too sophisticated to make mistakes, too experienced to give her an opening. But Max had not moved. The dog remained at her side, his attention fixed on something beyond the doorway, his body trembling with barely contained energy. Sarah had never seen him react this way to nothing. Whatever was in that house, Max desperately wanted to investigate. "Your dog seems agitated," Blackwell observed. "Perhaps he should be retrained." "My dog is highly trained and certified. His reactions are admissible evidence in court, as you well know." Blackwell's smile widened. "Indeed. But reactions alone do not constitute probable cause. If you have a warrant, you are welcome to search my property. Otherwise, I must insist you leave." He was right, and they both knew it. Sarah had no choice but to retreat, at least for now. She called Max to heel and began walking back down the driveway, her mind already racing through options for how to proceed. "Lieutenant Collins," Blackwell called after her. She turned. "Please give my regards to your partner. He really is a remarkable animal. It would be a shame if something happened to him." The threat was barely veiled, delivered with the casual confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Sarah felt her blood run cold, then hot with anger. She wanted to storm back up the driveway, to arrest him for threatening a police officer, to wipe that smug smile off his face. Instead, she nodded once and continued walking. Losing control would accomplish nothing, but she would not forget those words. And she would find a way to hold Harrison Blackwell accountable for whatever he was hiding behind his mansion walls. The investigation that followed was the most delicate of Sarah's career. Blackwell was connected, protected by wealth and influence, and a network of powerful friends. Any move against him had to be carefully considered, every piece of evidence ironclad, every procedure followed to the letter. One mistake would give him ammunition to claim harassment, to sue the department, to destroy careers. Sarah assembled a small team of officers she trusted absolutely. They worked in secrecy, sharing information only on a need-to-know basis, building their case slowly and methodically. Financial records were subpoenaed through carefully worded requests that obscured the true target. Surveillance was conducted from multiple angles, using techniques designed to avoid detection. Weeks of patient work revealed a pattern that confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Harrison Blackwell had been more than Alejandro Vega's attorney. He had been a partner in the operation, using his legal expertise to structure the organization in ways that minimized exposure and maximized profit. When Vega went to prison, Blackwell had inherited control of the remaining network, continuing operations on a smaller scale while avoiding the mistakes that had brought down his predecessor. The drugs were different now, sourced through new suppliers and distributed through different channels. But the fundamental structure remained the same, and the false bottom compartments, the hidden spaces in decorative items, the Christmas market connection, all of it continued under Blackwell's guidance. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, one of Blackwell's employees, a young paralegal who had discovered evidence of illegal activity and struggled with her conscience for months, finally decided to come forward. She contacted the FBI through an anonymous tip line, and her information was routed to Sarah's task force. The paralegal's testimony provided the missing pieces: bank accounts, safe houses, the names of distributors still operating in the Atlanta area. She had photographs of documents, recordings of conversations, a paper trail that connected Blackwell directly to the continuation of Vega's enterprise. It was exactly what they needed. The arrest warrant was executed on a cold morning in early December, almost exactly 1 year after the original Christmas market discovery. Sarah led the team that approached Blackwell's mansion, Max at her side. A dozen officers fanned out across the property. This time, there was no pretense of noise complaints. The warrant was comprehensive, covering the mansion and all outbuildings, vehicles, and electronic devices. Blackwell's attorney arrived within minutes, sputtering protests and threatening lawsuits, but the documents were in order and the search proceeded. Max led them directly to what they were looking for: a hidden room behind a bookcase in Blackwell's private study, accessible only through a concealed mechanism. Inside, they found evidence of ongoing criminal enterprise: cash, product samples, distribution lists, communication devices. And in the corner, a collection of snow globes that made Sarah's stomach turn. Blackwell was handcuffed and led to a waiting patrol car, his expression no longer smug, but pale with shock. He had believed himself untouchable, protected by money and connections and legal expertise. He had underestimated the persistence of the officers he had threatened, the dedication of the dog he had dismissed. As they loaded him into the vehicle, Sarah leaned close. "My partner sends his regards," she said, "and he wanted me to tell you that he is doing just fine." She stepped back and watched the car drive away. Around her, officers continued processing the scene, cataloging evidence, documenting everything with the thoroughness that would ensure conviction. The case was far from over. There would be legal battles ahead, motions and hearings and trials that might take years to resolve. But the architect was in custody. The network was exposed. The Christmas market distribution scheme, which had threatened to become an annual tradition of poison, was finally and completely destroyed. Sarah walked back to her vehicle where Max waited, tail wagging, eager for the next adventure. She opened the door and let him jump in, then climb behind the wheel. "Good boy, Max," she said, reaching back to scratch behind his ears. "Very good boy." The Belgian Malinois settled into his compartment with a contented sigh. His work for the day was done. The scents had been followed, the criminals found, the mission accomplished. Sarah started the engine and pulled away from the mansion that had hidden so much darkness. The sun was rising higher, burning away the morning mist, promising a bright day ahead. Christmas was coming again, and the markets would open, and families would shop for gifts without fear, because Sarah Collins and K-9 Max stood guard, because they refused to stop until justice was served, because the bond between a handler and her partner was stronger than any criminal enterprise, more persistent than any conspiracy, more enduring than any threat. The story continued. There would always be new cases, new challenges, new villains to defeat. But for today, in this moment, driving through Atlanta's streets with the best partner she could ask for, Sarah allowed herself to feel something rare and precious. She felt at peace, and that peace, hard-won and well-deserved, was the truest measure of everything they had accomplished together. The second Christmas market season since the original discovery arrived with a changed atmosphere. Vendors who had witnessed the scandal of the previous year had implemented their own security measures, forming committees to vet new participants and monitor for suspicious activity. The market management had partnered with the police department to establish permanent K-9 presence during operating hours, a visible deterrent to anyone who might consider using the venue for illegal purposes. Sarah and Max were assigned to the opening weekend, walking through familiar rows of booths now decorated with fresh garlands and twinkling lights. The faces were mostly new, the compromised vendors gone, replaced by legitimate craftspeople eager to rebuild the market's reputation. The atmosphere felt lighter, cleaner, purged of the corruption that had lurked beneath the surface. She stopped at a booth selling ornaments and recognized the young artist who had created the glass ball depicting an officer and K-9. He smiled broadly when he saw her approaching. "Lieutenant Collins, I hoped you would come back this year." He reached beneath his counter and produced a new ornament, this one showing two figures walking through a Christmas market, snowflakes falling around them. "I made this for you, to commemorate the anniversary." Sarah accepted the gift with genuine emotion. The ornament was beautiful, capturing something essential about the partnership she shared with Max. The dog seemed to sense the significance of the moment, pressing closer to her leg and looking up at the glass ball with curious eyes. "Thank you," she said. "This means more than you know." She continued her patrol with the ornament safely tucked in her pocket, her heart fuller than it had been in months. The work they did was often thankless, the dangers they faced rarely acknowledged by those they protected. Moments like this, small gestures of recognition and gratitude, reminded her why she had chosen this path. The market's final weekend coincided with the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Sarah worked the evening shift, watching as families gathered to enjoy the extended hours, to sip hot chocolate and listen to carol singers and marvel at the decorations that transformed the park into a winter wonderland. Children pointed at Max with delight, their parents explaining that he was a police dog who kept everyone safe. Safe. The word carried weight that only Sarah could fully appreciate. She thought about the previous year, about the poison hidden in innocent-looking merchandise, about the lives that would have been destroyed if Max had not stopped at that snow globe booth. The market's transformation from crime scene to celebration was a testament to the resilience of community, the ability of people to reclaim spaces that had been violated. At midnight, she stood at the edge of the market and watched fireworks explode over Atlanta's skyline. Max sat beside her, his head tilted back, his eyes tracking the bursts of color that painted the winter sky. The crowd cheered and applauded, celebrating the turning point when darkness began its retreat and light began its return. Sarah thought about cycles, about the endless rotation of seasons and years, about the perpetual struggle between those who built and those who destroyed. Her work placed her at the boundary between order and chaos, a guardian standing watch while others lived their lives in peace. It was a responsibility she had chosen, a burden she carried willingly, because someone had to hold the line. Max leaned against her leg, warm and solid and present. 7 years of partnership had taught them to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's movements, to function as a single unit in moments of crisis. That bond had saved lives, including their own. It had brought down criminal empires and protected countless innocents. It was, Sarah believed, the most important relationship of her life. The fireworks finale lit up the sky in cascading waves of gold and silver, and the crowd's cheers reached a crescendo. Sarah applauded along with everyone else, caught up in the collective joy of the moment. When the last spark faded, she turned and began her final patrol of the evening, Max falling into step beside her without needing to be commanded. The market was closing, vendors packing up their remaining merchandise, families heading home with arms full of purchases. Sarah moved through the thinning crowd, her eyes automatically scanning for threats, her posture relaxed but alert, old habits born of years of training and experience. She completed her circuit and returned to the command post near the entrance. Captain Morrison was there, coordinating the end-of-shift logistics, his face tired but satisfied. "Quiet night," he observed, "just the way we like them." Sarah nodded, thanks to a lot of hard work by a lot of people. Morrison looked at Max, who had settled into a resting position beside Sarah's feet. "That dog of yours is something special, Collins. I have worked with a lot of K-9 teams over the years, but you two have something different, something that cannot be taught or trained. We trust each other," Sarah said simply. "That is the foundation of everything else." The captain smiled. "Get some rest. You have earned it." Sarah collected Max and headed for the parking lot. The temperature had dropped sharply after sunset, and her breath formed clouds that drifted away on the still night air. The Christmas market was dark now, the lights extinguished, the booths closed until morning. It looked peaceful, ordinary, just another public space awaiting the return of visitors. But Sarah saw it differently. She saw the rows where they had found contaminated products, the booths where innocent-looking vendors had hidden deadly merchandise. She saw the investigation that had unraveled a network spanning multiple states. She saw the trial that had sent a drug kingpin to prison, and the subsequent operation that had taken down his corrupt attorney. All of it started here, in this place, on a morning when her dog had stopped in front of a snow globe display and refused to move. She opened the back door of her vehicle and Max jumped in, settling into his familiar position. Sarah climbed behind the wheel and sat for a moment, looking at the dark market through her windshield. "Ready to go home, buddy?" she asked. Max's tail thumped against the seat. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, joining the sparse late-night traffic on the streets of Atlanta. The city sprawled around her, vast and varied, full of people living their lives in millions of different ways. Most would never know how close they had come to danger, how narrowly they had been protected from threats they could not see. That was all right. That was how it was supposed to be. The best protection was invisible, the kind that prevented harm before it could occur. Sarah did not need recognition or gratitude. She needed only the opportunity to continue her work, to keep standing watch, to keep making a difference. The drive home took 20 minutes through mostly empty streets. Sarah parked in her usual spot and let Max out, watching as he trotted to the fence and began his routine inspection of the yard. Everything was in order, as he had known it would be. But he checked anyway, because that was his nature. Inside, Sarah fed Max his dinner and made herself a cup of tea. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, looking out at the Christmas lights still glowing on her neighbors' houses. The ornament from the young artist sat on the table beside her, its glass surface catching the ambient light and throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. She thought about the year ahead, the cases they would work, the criminals they would apprehend, the dangers they would face together. There would be triumphs and setbacks, victories and frustrations. That was the nature of police work. That was the nature of life. But tonight, on this solstice evening, Sarah allowed herself to simply rest, to appreciate the warmth of her home, the presence of her partner, the satisfaction of work well done, to acknowledge that even in a world full of darkness, there were points of light worth protecting. Max finished his dinner and padded over to lie at her feet. His eyes were closed within moments, his breathing slow and steady, peaceful in the complete trust that his handler would keep watch. Sarah smiled and sipped her tea. The longest night was ending. Tomorrow would bring a little more light, and whatever came next, they would face it together.